Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're into the final session. We're starting this slightly late, but don't worry, our finish time will still be the same. That's the proposal. We're now in the panel session, which allows me to reintroduce Steve and Ian and Joyce, and to introduce for the first time Tim Barraclough, sitting in the middle of the table. Tim is the Director of Innovation and Development at the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, and that means he's responsible for some key initiatives taken to modernise the justice system. He worked with Lord Carloway in the 2011 review that Lady Dorian mentioned, and he has been the lead official in the Evidence and Procedure Review from the start of that, and again that was mentioned by Lady Dorian. And the ongoing work in Evidence and Procedure Review aims to improve the experience of vulnerable people involved in criminal proceedings. And I thought before we take questions, Tim could maybe just take 2 minutes to let us know where we are with the Evidence and Procedure Review, and then we'll take questions from the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Turn it on. Thank you very much. Just to say, the Evidence and Procedure Review is work involving all the different justice agencies and the legal profession and a number of voluntary sector organisations, look at a whole range of ways to improve the way, in particular, that evidence is presented in court, because the basic presumption is that the way we currently both take evidence and then question witnesses and the accused as witnesses in court is, in some cases, about the worst possible way to get at the truth. And there are an awful lot better ways we can do it, taking it closer to the time of the incident they're talking about, not asking people to undergo a memory test several months, if not years later, and also doing it in a way and with questioning that is more appropriate for the understanding of the witness, and is more appropriate for actually eliciting from them a full and complete and accurate, as Joyce was saying, version of the events. There have been 2 reports from the Evidence Procedure Review work so far. It is true to say that most of this is focused on complainers and witnesses rather than the accused, but it is recognising the work going forward, and we're working alongside particularly Scottish Government in their consideration of appropriate adults and intermediaries, that any measures going forward will have to include consideration of how best to facilitate the effective participation of the accused as much as complainants and other witnesses. So there are work streams going on. The reason Lady Dorian isn't here anymore, she's actually conducting a workshop at this minute on one of the issues in relation to cross-examination of witnesses with a whole range of stakeholders. I've dropped out of that meeting to be with you, and I said to Andrew, I'm Lady Dorian's stunt double.
Thank you, Tim. So, questions? Yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Moira Healy. I work for the Mental Welfare Commission, but I'm on the Scottish Appropriate Adult Network. I've been an appropriate adult myself. I've loved the idea of intermediaries in court, because I don't think appropriate adults with their training can support. Can people hear me now? Yeah. I don't think the appropriate adults are particularly helpful in court. It's quite a different role, but I was disappointed to hear the use of intermediaries. So the question is to Joyce, is why has there been such a rapid turnover? Why can't you hold on to your intermediaries in England and Wales? Because it sounds like a fascinating and really useful job.
There are some who were recruited at the beginning who are still there. But it's interesting that after recruitment exercises probably every 2 years since the inception, we still were not able to get past the initial kind of threshold numbers of about 100. Last year they recruited an additional 100, so now we're up to 200. I think that they're insufficiently supported in what is a complex and challenging role. But because we haven't done exit interviews, we don't know why they're leaving. This is my view about it. But it's certainly something, they've created their own peer support groups, but there isn't active supervision. And I think a lot of it too is about telling people what the job involves. more honestly and accurately at the beginning. A lot of people come into it who are already employed, but courts demand tremendous flexibility. These cases are meant to be fixed, but they get put into warned lists, and people are asked to hold 2 weeks during which this case could be called on at any point. So there's stresses inherent in the work, and there are stresses created by a system that doesn't respond to them very well. But it's certainly something to be aware of in terms of the numbers.
So can I also just ask Joyce, with the registered intermediaries, is this something they do as an addition to their day job?
There are some people now who are full-time intermediaries, and they love it. They wouldn't be doing it otherwise. But a significant proportion of people on the register are also working part-time. And my own view is that it's actually very difficult to accommodate with a part-time job unless your part-time job is also flexible.
That's the difficulty of the consensus that we've had today. Sorry.
Can I ask a wee question, just because we didn't get onto it in the round table discussion? I just wondered, Joyce, maybe from your experience, if the supports in court are in place, does it mean that more people with a learning disability are deemed fit to plead and therefore get the right to stand trial, as Steve was saying, is so important?
Well, I don't have to answer that question because the Law Commission answered it. And the Law Commission envisaged that it would be easier, easier is the wrong word, but it would be more appropriate for people to be able to go to trial with an intermediary. The risk being, of course, that people who are unfit to give evidence or to be tried are being put into the process with the protection of having an intermediary. Intermediaries can't take a view about whether somebody is fit for trial. If you need an expert view about that, you go to an expert. That's not something an intermediary passes a judgment about. But the thought is that it would be clearer what effective participation could be enabled with an intermediary. I think that was one of the reasons why the Law Commission is so keen to see it put on a statutory basis.
I mean, if a person who is not fit to be trial but gets put into an institution who has done a very long time in hospital, comes out into the community after so many years, and he's escorted from day to day, 24 hours a day, for the rest of his life, who's still not able to say, look, it was never proved I did it. We have many people who come to our group who have been through that system and they're still wondering, have I better not been gone to prison or gone through the court and found out guilty?
I think that was the point that Steve was making this morning.
I think the difference with that is that's part of the Mental Welfare Commission have got a big input in that in the mental health proceedings, where if someone is deemed to be not fit to go to trial, but they have what's called an examination of facts, so that facts are established to say the person did do something, but didn't have the capacity for it to be a crime, then they get shunted off into this alternative system where they go into hospital on a hospital order, they may be there for a long time, and not really get the satisfaction of ever being vindicated one way or the other. And that's why perhaps the issue, and I know that Steve had a different view about it, but maybe the issue of what alternative or diversity routes might be available to prevent just that situation. Because it is, I agree with you, it's a very unsatisfactory way of dealing with things. So maybe there does need to be a wider look at, if it's, rather than the whole examination of facts thing, which is still basically a court trial, it's still a trial that goes in the same way as a court trial. Rather than have that process, maybe find a different way to deal with someone in that position.
But it's also like, another way is, if it goes through court and the psychiatrist turns and says to the judge, this person is fit not to go to prison, this person better off in prison. But his solicitor will not challenge that psychiatrist in court.
Well, if they find that the psychiatrist the person's not fit to go to trial, it becomes a matter for the Crown to decide how they wish to proceed. They can either decide they're not going to proceed at all, and simply withdraw the charge, or they can proceed with an examination of facts where it's to establish what happened, but the penalty would be a hospital order or something of that kind. It wouldn't be a conviction as such.
Well, I know for myself that some people have went to court. At the end of the day, the solicitor is not challenging the psychiatrist.
The solicitor can't really challenge a psychiatrist unless they have a psychiatrist of their own, if you like, who takes a different view, because the solicitor's not medically qualified.
I think that the whole thrust of this is that the more sophisticated techniques that we have for identifying vulnerabilities, the more that we can hope that people can have effective participation in their trial and in the criminal justice system. I think no one's pretending that the current or historic models were perfect, and we're moving in the right direction towards properly identifying what different vulnerabilities are and then addressing them properly, effective participation tailored to the accused, to use Joyce's phrase. That's, I think, what we're aiming for, although that won't happen tomorrow.
No, I think I was going to just pick up. I think I'm trying to clarify, because I know James and what you might be talking about is you sometimes get situations where, well, you know, if a particular report doesn't meet if somebody's deemed fit to plead in a particular report, sometimes solicitors go and get a different report to say that they're not fit, or vice versa. You know, that it can be used that way. And I don't know if that was picking up kind of what you were meaning about challenging it, James. I don't know if that.
We've had certain. No. We have had certain judges, certain solicitors who have been really high up, who have come to the office to be involved in the jury stuff. And we're actually said to them, some psychiatrists will, some judges will, some solicitors will not challenge the psychiatrists in court.
Are you meaning in mental health tribunals? Maybe, James.
Maybe one or two things, but all sort of things else.
And because does this sometimes relate as well about the principles of the Mental Health Act and things like that as well, challenging based on the principles?
Probably.
I think it's maybe although another very relevant thing, it may be a slightly side issue here about Mental Health Act tribunals, about the guiding principles.
Ken, I can go last if you want.
It's not yet.
It was just to ask, would it not be easier to have like certain projects set up where sheriffs could actually use them to their advantage? Because there is projects for women as well, to go instead of going to prison and stuff like that. Would it not be easier to have a project for people with learning difficulties? What basically they go to instead of having court proceedings and stuff like that, and use it to the full advantage. Have certain projects out there that the sheriffs can use to their advantage to stop re-offending, or for the person to have an understanding. Because there is projects out there, and I've watched the TV programme, the BBC. I gave you some literature about it, Kenny, but the findings that I found. There is projects out there, but sheriffs don't have the right to use them, because there's nothing out there that they can have. There's nothing in their statutory rules to say that they're allowed to use them or refer people. I think there should be projects out there where it will stop people from getting this long and painful process and mystifying process, what is the criminal justice system, and hopefully sort it out so they don't come into that contact again. It's as simple as that.
I'm sure if Chef Hubie had something like that, I'd be able to make you delighted. And it is exactly what I was saying, it's that point about finding an alternative way of dealing with people who don't fit into the criminal justice system, or for whom the criminal justice system, as it currently stands, is the wrong way to proceed. So I think you're absolutely right. It would be ideal if there was a diversionary process that could allow other types of project to help people so they don't come back.
There is projects out there, but sheriffs have said that they don't have the right to do that. They don't feel like they've got the right to.
What we don't have is the power to divert from prosecution by the time it comes to court.
Yeah.
If the decision is taken to prosecute, then our role is to determine whether a crime's been committed or not, or whether someone's fit to plead or not, and then to sentence if need be. And I do know that in sentencing, in some community payback orders, in some areas, there are programmes of exactly the type that you're describing,
Yeah.
which offer a level of support and continuity and structure that can be very helpful. But what sheriffs don't have the power to do is to decide this is not a case that should be prosecuted.
Yeah.
They have to then deal with it on the basis of the fact the Crown have taken the decision to prosecute. But we've heard about the various considerations that the prosecutors look at before deciding whether to prosecute. But I'm all for as much variety of different programmes that give us alternative disposals, particularly alternatives to custody, if they're there.
Yeah. And I know a lot of sheriffs in Scotland do want that variety.
I mean, it's like, I went to a conference with Kenny up at the bridge, up at the West End, about people were given the chance to report back to the sheriff once a month or once a fortnight. And if they did do that for so long, it was what you call it, it was not put on record.
It would be admonished.
It was demolished, yes.
Well, I do that. We have structured deferred sentences. We have community payback order reviews. There are structures for doing that we already use. But what we can't do is decide as a sheriff, I don't think this person should be prosecuted, unless there's a mental health or mental disorder reasons for doing that. There were a couple of other questions. I know you had your hand up, Pete. I think, was there a question? Maybe not. Sorry, yes.
We're interested in the model set up in down in England, and as you said, then got a model in Northern Ireland. The funding to set that up, was that a government decision? And if that's the case, how do we encourage the Scottish government to do exactly the same thing?
Well, I can't speak for Northern Ireland, but the funding for the England and Wales pilots when it was set up was central. So the pilot areas, the payments were all dealt with centrally. At the point of rollout, we recommended that central funding be continued for at least a year or two till every part of the country got embedded knowledge about how this worked. Because everybody starts out from a position of, we don't really need this. You have to actually try it until you see. And I was concerned, in fact, that what has actually happened, the decision at rollout was to transfer the funding to local areas. So police have to pay if it's a police request, prosecution have to pay if it's comes at the court stage, and if it's for the accused, the legal aid board has to pay. And the decisions are different all around the country. The levels of usage are different all around the country, and the take-up has been slow around the country because the areas that didn't get a chance to try it when they didn't have to pay for it, some of them were very slow. There's still some of the smallest police areas in the country request more intermediaries than some of the biggest cities, and that's 12 years on. So the issue about even access to funding, I think, is an important one. I'm glad you asked.
And Peter, did you?
My question was very much related to that one. It was about where the funding came from. I suppose the second thing is, do you have an idea of what the kind of annual costs are for the intermediary scheme for England?
I have no idea about totals, but at the moment intermediaries are paid £37 an hour if they're on the register. Intermediaries for defendants could, in theory, charge what they want because it's not regulated.
Do you have again, it's just an interesting, what this one discussions in our breakout group was about, you know, the intermediary scheme, and if it came to Scotland, how's it funded, how much did it cost, and the rest of things. But do you have any information about, for example, the percentage of cases that intermediaries have used?
Tiny,
Yeah.
because we've got some idea about the number of potentially eligible people, and they're never going to be appointed for everybody who is eligible on paper. It's always going to be a relatively small proportion. What I think is crucial is that they punch above their weight. You know, as I said, for most of the time the scheme has only been 100 across the country. Now maybe has been about 10,000 requests over that time for appointments. But the impact that they've had on other cases, the fact that they've changed how people deal with vulnerability, that's really the key thing, because they've been an awareness raising exercise. I'm sorry I can't give you absolute figures on costs, but the impact is very small. And Tim knows what I'm going to say, which I forgot from my presentation, is you're not going to find that out till you pilot it. You'll never get a critical mass of people saying, we must do this, because they're not really going to be persuaded, the reluctant ones, until they actually see it in operation. So, getting on with the pilot.
On the same question, if you did do cost analysis of intermediaries, they're saving in the long term. Because we find when we supported Junkersley Phone Court, which when we supported more turned up, we didn't fail to appear, there wasn't warrants, they weren't remanded. So the savings came, albeit the court system, later on, as well as improving practice. And I think if Scotland could get us community service that is across the country and equal and not dependent on postcode, as you're saying, then actually it could end up not be cost neutral, or it could be savings in the long term.
I'm sure the others will have a view about the savings. The pilots that are going on in England at the moment are on pre-trial cross-examination, and the judges in charge of that, who are hugely enthusiastic, see enormous potential for savings. Intermediaries are not involved in all of those cases, they're actually only involved in a small bit. But it's an extension of that process that they started with, about controlling questioning. The typical thing the judges say is, yes, there's an investment up front in the timing to prepare, but trials that used to last for 5 days last for 3 days, which is a huge saving.
My name's Stephen Heath. I'm chair of a community interest company who are contracted by the 3 Ayrshire local authorities to provide appropriate adult services. Part of the contract is that they asked us to provide the service in court also, so it's a through service. We get very good feedback from sheriffs, sheriff clerks, procurators, fiscals. Joyce, I looked at your tick list of intermediaries and appropriate adults. The role is slightly different, and the big issue is around the no confidentiality, as it were, of appropriate adults and the fact that they can be called as witnesses. We have to ensure that any appropriate adults we deploy to assist in the investigation process are not used in court in the same one, and that's a difficult one to overcome. Could you see a development of the appropriate adult role to encompass some of the intermediary role, or do you think that's too big?
I couldn't answer that question on the knowledge that I've got at the moment, but certainly the model that I'm familiar with stresses continuity. They'd be looking to have the same person if they possibly could. We started out with guidance that said, have a different intermediary at trial. 2 trials in, the steering group said, this doesn't work. It's not in anybody's best interest. You've got somebody who's got the rapport, who's got the experience of working with this person. Why start again? You'd have to pay for another assessment. So that was ditched at trial 3. So whether it's possible to gravitate the intermediary model onto what you've got already, I don't know the answer to that.
That was part of our group discussion that was raised by DS up there, where the issue about that the appropriate adult not being allowed into the interview or the phone call that the accused person has with their solicitor. so that there's no understanding then from the police point of view when that person comes back out from the consultation, whether or not they actually understand the advice they've been given by the solicitor. And part of the problem is exactly that, because the appropriate adult can be used as a witness against them, there's an immediate barrier to trust and to proper communication there, because although the appropriate adult may be satisfied that the person understands what the police are doing, you've got no idea whether the person understands what they've been told by their solicitor. And it's a huge issue. And I think the fact that they can be used as a witness is one of the fundamental flaws of the whole thing. If anything's going to change in the government review of it, that has to be, in my view, one of the first things it goes.
That's the biggest issue for us, and the feedback for persons accessing the service also would be the continuity in the relationship. And we came out in our breakout session, it's a very important point. That aside, we're still getting good feedback from sheriffs and others because of the close relationship. But yeah, I think it's a very important point. Thanks.
Maybe one last question.
Just a quick question to Tim. See, with the evidence and procedure review, we're talking here all about court and about what happens after court. As a police officer, I was drawn right back to the beginning. Is there any discussions in the evidence and procedure review regarding joint interviews with adults and BRI interviews with adults? Because we could do that, same as we do with children, or I know we're talking about Barnhouse model and a whole load of other things with children, if we could do that with vulnerable adults right from the outset, then all the evidence that's gathered right at the beginning would be so much plainer for everybody to see, because you could see people's actions, movements, the questions were actually asked, rather than try to work it out from some kind of pieced together statement that you can't see.
Absolutely, there is a work stream on joint investigative interviews, which is and part of the basic finding of the original evidence procedure review was, if you get that initial questioning right in the first place and you get that evidence captured early on and the questioning has been appropriate, and again you have to take into account the witness, whoever it is, their vulnerabilities and their needs, then that can save a huge amount of time later on in the process in terms of requiring less cross-examination, or you might not require cross-examination at all. So the short answer to your question is, yes, there is a work stream on that initial interview, that police or joint interview with social work. For various reasons, the way in which it's being staged and phased is that it's looking at child witnesses first, because that's where there's the most examples of current practice that we can look at how to improve that. And then it will look to see, well, how do these same principles apply to adult witnesses as well? So the short answer is, yeah, we're looking at that. I just want to pick up on a few things that have been said about intermediaries, without wishing to horrify my Scottish Government colleagues by committing them to anything. I do know that, again, it's underneath the evidence procedure umbrella, they are looking, they are going to extend their consideration of the appropriate adult provisions with a further consideration of what an unregistered intermediary or similar program might look like if you did try to either put them side by side, or replace one with the other, or get some kind of hybrid that actually pull together all the best practice from both systems and put them together in something going forward. That work hasn't really started yet, but they are very conscious of the fact that there is this whole set of messages about registered intermediaries. They've seen the benefits. I think there are some cost figures in one of the evidence procedure review reports, not very detailed, that indicate how it's been put into place in the Ministry of Justice down south. I think the other thing to say is, we went down south to have a look at these in practice, and they just transformed the quality of the court proceedings. They really do. Can't emphasise enough the ability to turn something that is potentially highly painful and difficult for all involved, not least the person being asked the questions, into a much more simple and appropriate format is enormous. So, as Joyce says, intermediaries punch above their weight. And the other thing is, sorry to rabbit on here, the Advocate's Gateway, which takes a lot of the learning from that process and provides it in toolkits that are easy for practitioners to understand and apply, means that the kind of learning that you get through intermediaries can be dispersed over cases where they're not involved. And again, the judiciary say to lawyers, I'm not going to let you question this person until you've satisfied me that you've read the appropriate toolkit and know what you're doing.
I think that takes us to the conclusion, really. I think we've had a very good, positive day. The consensus for a minute looked as if it would mean there were no questions for the panel, but I'm pleased that there were some. I think with a very good flow, we started with Steve's powerful account of his experience, authentic and raw, and whilst he wasn't seeking sympathy, he highlighted gaps in the system that were very helpful as an introduction and as a launch to today. Lady Dorian gave us messages about effective participation and the steps that have been taken and are going to be taken to facilitate these. And the importance of the message is not just what it was, not just what she said, but that she, as the